Welcome to Civics and Coffee. My name is Alicia, and I am a self-professed history nerd. Each week, I'm going to chat about a topic on U.S. history and give you both the highlights and occasionally break down some of the complexities in history and share stories you may not remember learning in high school, all in the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. Hey everyone, welcome back. In March, I attended the Society for Military History's annual conference. I got to listen to several scholars discuss their research, including today's guest, Dr. Stan Fisher. He is a historian of the United States specializing in the field of naval history. He recently wrote a book, Sustaining the Carrier War, which looks at the buildup, standardization, and evolution of the Navy's aircraft maintenance system. Dr. Fisher earned his PhD from the University of Maryland and is currently a history professor at the United States Naval Academy. He graciously agreed to sit down with me and discuss his book and how it should inform future decisions. We held our interview over Zoom, so I am including my normal sound quality warning here. I hope you all enjoy the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back. With me today is Dr. Stan Fisher. He is a naval historian and professor at the United States Naval Academy and recently wrote Sustaining the Carrier War, the Deployment of U.S. Naval Air Power to the Pacific, which will be the focus of our conversation today. Welcome, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is an honor. You've got a great following and some great podcasts out there. I feel humbled to be included in your group.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And we met at the Society of Military History conference when you gave a phenomenal talk based on your book, which focuses on the human aspects of aircraft maintenance. And so I think before we dive in, why do you think the subject of aircraft maintenance has gone under the radar for historians studying military strategy in World War II?
Well, that's a great question. Before I answer it, I do want to say that I appreciate, like I said, do appreciate you having me on here. But I think in general, history thanks you for producing these type of podcasts, and your programs basically span everything from the election of the House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy a few weeks ago to the Cold War to World War II and beyond. So this is really good stuff that I think most of our country and our society needs to learn more about. So that being said, why would anyone want to study the aircraft maintenance in World War II and why has that gone on the radar? That's a great question. To be honest, and not to make this too difficult, I really think that type of this type of material, it's for the big productions, for the Hollywood, for the mindset that most of us have growing up and watching things on TV and on the silver screen, as they say. It's not as cool. It's not as quote sexy as a battle, right? There's no big names in aviation maintenance. There's no Halseys, there's no Spruans, there's no Nimitz. I mean, they're there in parts and parcels, but they're not the focus, right? You don't have Butch O'Hare and multiple kills of Japanese Zeros and Jimmy Thatch and so forth. So that really is, I think, one of the reasons. And because of that, I think Winston Churchill said it, those who win often get to write history. I'm butchering his quote there, but many of the big stories and the big studies have been either initiated or written by those flag officers and those individuals who have gotten their recognition, right? And battles that's exciting, but this is important.
And your book kind of covers both the kind of interwar years between World War I and World War II. And so what influence did the events of Pearl Harbor have on U.S. investments in aviation power?
Well, to be honest, from my study and my research, it really didn't have a huge influence in the investment in aviation. FDR had already kind of drank the Kool-Aid prior to Pearl Harbor. and realized that he had kind of proverbial been caught behind the eight ball. Most everything was in place before December 7th. And we had changed our numbers as far as implemented a spending plan, implemented a accelerated manufacturing plan, implemented the numbers of naval aircraft that FDR had authorized for the Navy. Went from 3,000 to 10,000 to 15,000 within just a few weeks in 1940. And that program actually started in 1938. So there was the trouble on the horizon. Everyone saw it coming. But I think the first focus was Germany, right? That was FDR's focus, Germany first. But Japan kind of caught us looking the other way. And so by 1940, we actually had plans for 18 carriers in place already. In June of 1940, we went from 3,000 to 10,000, and then a week later, 15,000 authorized naval aircraft. So, but that was all before Pearl Harbor. Once Pearl Harbor hit, all that did, I think, was really accelerate it and bring everything to light, saying, hey, guess what? There's a new game in town, and we need to start playing. So, yes, many of our battleships were sunk at Pearl Harbor, but it was not like it changed the face of naval warfare. I mean, it did in some sense. Fortunately, Halsey was out to sea with, all of our carriers were gone at that point.
Right.
But we really didn't have many aircraft anyway. So it's one of those things that it is inevitable, but it did not change. It wasn't that one event that like shifted everything one way.
And why was the Navy unprepared for the necessary buildup of aircraft and personnel needed to maintain them?
Well, from my research, I really think that they underestimated the need. Right. I think that John Towers, who was the chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics at the time, throughout the latter part of the interwar years, he really just kind of underestimated based on what he was thinking, what he had seen, and what was the status quo. Right. Change is, every big organizations, bureaucracies are always adverse to change. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, it takes people. And he was even offered by some of his senior officers that were working for him, said, hey boss, we need to change the numbers of folks that we have supporting our enlistments, the people in the background that are kind of working the administration side of this, and we can't handle it the way we are staffed. And I was looking in one of my times at the archives down in College Park, looking at his actual notes to a letter he got from Captain George Murray at the time, who was working for him at the Bureau of Aeronautics. And his exact words were, stand pat, denied, right? We want more people, but he said, no, we're fine. And so Towers really wasn't, and this was about 1937, 1938, I believe, and he really wasn't up for it. There was competition space too, right? There was a need for sailors at sea. There was a need for sailors on the ships. And Chester Nimitz, who was running the Bureau of Navigation, soon to be changed to the Bureau of Personnel, was in charge of where people went in the Navy. And even when Towers asked him for more bodies to come and work at these, what I call trade schools, but the vocational schools that were training the technicians, Nimitz said, basically, you get what you get. Don't make a fit. He said, I'm not going to send you bodies from ships at sea to train sailors that are fresh out of boot camp. You need to figure out a different way, make do, and do it that way. So now, Towers and Nimitz, I don't believe they got along that well, particularly in the beginning of the war. I think later on in the war, when Towers moved under his command as commander of carrier forces in the South Pacific, I think that he definitely may have changed that relationship. But at a time when we were short on people across the Navy, Nimitz was really not going to give up a select few of trained technicians just so the aviation side of the house could have their piece of the pie.
And one of the big themes of your book is talking about the evolution of the technology. And so why do you think kind of in the run up? Is it kind of the same thought process as to why it was perhaps kind of lacking that standardization structure and all of that before World War II? Was it just kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak, or were there other factors at play?
Yes, I think that technology was in terms of airplanes per
Hmm.
se. It was slow to slow to evolve, I guess, until about the mid 30s. You know, 1932, 33. I mean, even up to almost to the start of the war, there's still biplanes, flying off of Navy carriers, late 1930s, right? The horsepower in some of these aircraft were, say 1937 time frame. We're looking at maybe 800 or so horses on an F3, and then by midway through the war, when you have the F6F, and then we move into the F4 Corsair, you look at 2,300, almost 2,400 horsepower on these aircraft. So that was I guess, a fast movement of technology on actual airplanes, and think about all the other things like radar, right? Weapons, different weapons as far as air launched weapons, torpedoes, forward firing ordnance, guns. They don't really change too much, but you're starting to change the way we fight wars at sea. And so with that, as we call them, the 40, those of us who fly in the fleet and are not the scientists, and what we call them, the 40-pound heads, the guys that really know, the guys and gals that really know all the ins and outs of creating and designing and building this technology. They're cranking out stuff to slap on the sides of airplanes in order to fight the war, faster than we can implement that type of schooling.
Right.
And so that does drive a bit of the education side of it.
And then how did the development of the Naval Air Technical Training Command alter aviation training?
Standardization.
Yeah.
Right. That is the biggest thing that we saw with NATTC, is that it took the kind of hodgepodge courses of instruction in different training centers across the continental U.S. and brought it all under one roof, one single chain of command. You had one particular commanding officer of that command, and then there were different satellite campuses. So like a big university, but multiply that 10 times, because their training commands were based Jacksonville, Florida, Millington, Tennessee, Norman, Oklahoma, Chicago, and then various, Corpus Christi, Texas, various other places around. That standardized. It took the onus off of the local base commanders, who were also trying to figure out how to do their maintenance. How that now they didn't have to worry about the technicians. They just allowed, that was all under the umbrella of NATTC. So standardization, developing a 6-month program, and it worked.
Yeah. And you spent some time talking about Rear Admiral Albert Cushing Reed, and specifically his relationship with the NATTC. So I'm curious, what role did he have in the NATTC's success?
Well, Reed was a known quantity. He flew the first flight across the Atlantic in 1919 in the aircraft NC-4, and he was actually he and Towers were part of that mission. There was 4 airplanes that left. Only one made it, and that was Reed. So he had a bit of a, not notoriety, but he had some people knew who he was, right? So he was well respected in the community. He had some clout, and so what he was able to do was, being a friend of Towers, I really think that it was kind of a hand pick from Towers, because once Towers and the Bureau of Aeronautics gave up that training mission, Towers knew Reed could handle it. He was either up for flag or already a flag officer at that time, and said, let's give it to an old salt, people who know his name, and then he can organize people under him, and he's going to have a name that, when really, I think when the requests go up to Congress for money and for support, as well as to the CNO if they see a guy like Reed behind that request. Okay, this he knows what he's doing, and he started a program that is still in existence today. I mean, NATTC is still there. It's based out of Pensacola, and they do a great job with with training our technicians and our maintainers. And then that all started in September 11th, 1942.
Yeah. And kind of giving the organization its credence, its validity, it's kind of giving it some weight behind it, right? It's just kind of another random training exercise or random attempt at training, right?
Right. So many things come and go, and the good idea fairies often pop up, but this was one that was a very good idea that we needed.
And kind of taking it back to the rapidly changing technology, how did the Navy respond to this rapid change in technology and ensure their technicians were prepared?
That's a good question. The first thing I think they tried to do is utilize the manufacturers and utilize some like Ford and so forth, and utilize their schooling programs. That unfortunately did not meet the need and the drive that the Navy, the numbers of people that we needed to get through the program. So they brought in some outside forces, if you will, particularly an individual by the name of Daniel Brim, and they brought him in as reservist under a lieutenant commander ranking. And he was a civilian who worked in the aviation industry. He was an engineer. He was also a licensed pilot, and he worked with the various companies out there designing the aviation maintenance industries and how they train their own mechanics. So he brought that mindset with him, and the first thing he did was look at what we were using for manuals, right? And really, it was just a hodgepodge of this particular school or this region. This group had their own notes, if you will, cliff notes on how to fix this engine or that aircraft or that propeller and all. And he brought everything together and consolidated, and basically wrote textbooks, standardized textbooks, and brought. Don't quote me. I think the number was in the 2 to 3 dozen that were, or maybe 4 dozen or so that were out there, kind of scattered about, and brought them down to below 10. Right. A standard number of textbooks that everybody was learning from the same thing. So that was one thing that was done to kind of handle this rapid changing of technology and get everyone on the same page. Also, NATTC developed the classroom mock-ups so that at their schoolhouses, they would bring in parts of aircraft or actual aircraft themselves and set them there in the classroom. So the students were going through, they would have classroom time, or they would be theory and standard, chalkboard type of stuff. But then they would go out and work in either a hangar on the flight line and actually put their hands on and actually do what they were just trying to learn in a theoretical or in the classroom setting. So that was hard. It was hard to come by at first, as far as actually to get those models or mock-ups, because everything that was getting built was getting sent out to the fleet. Eventually, those we got enough planes and things out there that they could start filling those classrooms and those training centers up with different mock-ups. And NATTC also made sure that they were actually the trainees were actually working on the flight line and doing the things and doing the servicing and the preventive maintenance on the trainers and the planes that were there on a regular basis. So you're not getting just schooling, but you're getting practical education where you're getting your hands dirty. You're actually watching aircraft take off, land, shut down, and you're doing all the the things that need to be done in order to keep them flying.
And so, shifting gears a little bit to another aspect of the human side of aircraft aviation, you touch on the waves and how they aided in the Navy's training setup. So, for those who may not be aware, who were or what were the waves?
It's a great question. The waves. It was an acronym. The Navy loves its acronyms, as does every government agency, and this one had nothing to do with Hawaii, but it was the Women Activated for Volunteer Emergency Service. So we've had women in the Navy beforehand, but mostly in the role of you're in the medical corps, right? Your nurses, and then during World War I, we saw some in the administrative side of the house. We call them yeomen. Some people call them stenographers, but basically, in that secretarial role. The Waves brought women in and gave them an option to enlist or actually to commission as officers, and they would put them through a wave version of boot camp up in the Northeast at a couple small colleges up there, indoctrinate them into the ways of the Navy, and then they would take them there, and then they would send them to the actual training schools. So the Waves were they were filling the gap because we just didn't have enough people, right? We didn't have enough men to serve at sea as well as at home with a war this size. And so John Towers had asked, when the Waves program was established, he asked the CNO he wanted 20,000 Waves. And what's funny is that by the end of the war, he had gotten over 75,000, right? Yeah. And he thought 20,000 was too many to ask for, but there was such a swell of young women. Average age was around 22 to 23. But anywhere, I believe, 18 to the mid 20s was kind of the range that were volunteering to sign up and to work, and many of them wanted to go do something other than sit behind a desk, and they wanted to do jobs that they wouldn't have a chance to do. Right? We all know about Rosie the Riveter and the civilian side and building planes and building ships. This was just another version of that in uniform. And so the Waves took over much of the maintenance within the coast, the east and west coast of the United States. So in the continental U.S., most of our bases here were used for training pilots. And most of the maintenance that were done on those planes was handled by Waves who had gone through the NATTC courses, the NATT schools, alongside with men, 5 to 6 months at a time for each course, did very well while they were there, and came out qualified petty officer third class or second class, and then went out and got shipped out throughout the country and did everything that a male maintenance, aircraft maintenance maintainer would do, but they were just doing it not on the ship. They were doing it here inside the continental U.S. So without them, there's really a big question of, in my mind, would we have trained enough pilots? Would we have had, the Navy that we did to send out to the Pacific and as well as to the Atlantic without their role?
Yeah, because one of the points that you make really pretty well in the book is that by having these women available to kind of work in country, so to speak, it freed up the other technicians to go work on the ships and to go fly as they needed to. So kind of doubling or tripling your human capacity to fight. So that was
huge. Yeah, I mean, you look at 75,000, and we out of 250,000. I mean, that's a big number, a big help to the Navy, particularly in the aviation forum. So it's a good program. They obviously didn't need it after the war, but now we have plenty of women turning wrenches on the flight line now and on the carriers and ships. And so I think it's one of those things that really set the tone for where we are today.
Yeah. And you touched on it a little bit, but how were the experiences of the Waves compared to their male counterparts? Obviously, they stayed primarily within the country. What were some of the other differences of their experience?
Small things like uniform wear, say a personnel inspection, what they were looking for in their personnel inspections. They're checking to see if their hair is, a certain length at the collar, not below the collar. They're checking to see if the hemline of their skirts is all, a certain point above the knee. They didn't really, from my research, they didn't really get a whole lot of kind of bad vibes from the males. They were really kind of brought on as part of the team. Once in a while, they would get some stereotypes would kind of kick in, and one individual I was reading about, and I wrote about her in my book. She's from Baltimore, and she was I checked into one of her a new command, and part of every sailor knows how to sew, right? That's from the age of sail. All sailors know how to sew. I remember sewing on my own flight suit, sewing my insignia when I changed from Lieutenant JG to Lieutenant. It was a big deal. But when she checked in there, she was saying her job was to work with aircraft fabrics, so skin on the aircraft, on the wings and so forth. And what had been happening was a lot of the men, I guess, were as they were working, a lot of the seams in their trousers were busting, right? So probably splitting down the middle, if you will. And she said it was pretty funny because when she got on board, she was one of the first women to check into the command. They brought her, a pile of dungarees and said, "Hey, these all need to get sewn because and you're a woman, so you know how to do that." And she said it was in jest, right? Yeah. They all knew it, and she didn't mind, and she took it on board as kind of you're the new guy in town and on the team, and you gotta do the dirty work. And so she gladly did it, but her responses of going to the program, she said it was actually really, really good. That the men treated her very well, and everyone in her group, in her class, very well. And she said it was for herself, it was a really good opportunity with having, I think she said 140 women were there in her class going through, and you had close to 14,000 men at the same time, going through at various stages of the command. She said her exact quote was, "There was no wanting for dates." So they were allowed to date, right? They were allowed to date within their own rank structure. But the women often would go off and they kind of had their own divisions, or once they got into the fleet, and they kind of they had their own officers. And yes, you could be in a mixed company division out on working at whatever base that they were at. So it was a very well integrated program. And Admiral Radford at the time was the one who really kind of pushed it. And he said, we're gonna use them as much as we can everywhere, but on the deck of the carrier.
Yeah. And so a lot of your book is about kind of different innovative techniques that the Navy employed. And you describe in the book some of the creative ways that the Navy kind of tried to improve their capabilities and save money and improve training. And one of those included the beneficial suggestion program. So what was that and how successful was it?
Yes. The beneficial suggestion program. We like to call it the Benny Suggs. Right? You got to give something, because that rolls off the tongue much better. Still in existence today, Benny Suggs program. It was very successful, and what it did was, there's a lot of bright minds that serve in our military, and in the maintenance side of the house, there's a lot of good ideas that come up, and I know it's a shocker, but sometimes the stuff that gets handed down from the from the powers that be may not be the best way to do. There might be a better way to make a better mousetrap, as the saying goes. And so these young, bright sailors were given the opportunity to, when they found a way to do something or to fix a problem that was either better or had not been done before, they could submit that as part of this program up their chain of command, and it would go up to throughout the hall, somewhere in the halls of Bureau of Aeronautics. And then if it worked and it was, properly vetted through, you make sure it was safe to do so. For example, was trying to keep an airplane from moving on the deck, right? So an airplane has a tail wheel. If that tail wheel can swivel as a ship moves, that plane's going to move. Kind of hard to work on an airplane when it's moving back and forth. So you need to lock the tail wheel. And so there's different ways of doing that. And in one particular instance, one aircraft, to do that, you had to get like 12 guys, lift the airplane up off, a couple inches, and then put a pin in the tail wheel to keep it from moving. right? And a young sailor figured out a way to make a device that basically like a jack, and slip that under, and with a couple pumps of a hammer, of a lever, brought it up, able to stick, and stick the pin in and lock the tailwheel. And so if these things went up the chain and were vetted and determined to be safe and effective, then they were put into place, almost like a patent. And they were pushed out to the fleet and said, "Hey, this is this new device that Petty Officer John Smith has come up with. We've looked at it and we've tried it, and it's safe to do so, and you are authorized to use it." Sometimes they would make them and the Navy would ship them out, or otherwise they would give instructions on how to kind of make this homemade gadget. And then they would reward that sailor with actual money. And they still do today. There's a cash award that comes with that. So not as good as probably as, being in the outside world, if you were to do something like that, patent it, and then, now you're making hand over fist. But for the Navy, it's all government property anyway. But, for example, in 1944, this program, and this is 1944 dollars, saved the Navy $30 million.
Yeah.
48,000 of these suggestions, Benny Suggs, were submitted, and the Navy accepted 8,500 of them. So, not everything that goes up is, not all the great, good ideas are actually good ideas, but that's still, for every 5 that goes up, approximately one, they're going to keep one. And so those, it's a neat program, and it's a reward, right, for young minds or old minds that are out there doing this day to day, and like, I can do this differently. There's a better way of doing this, and so it's a great program.
Well, I'm happy to hear it's still around.
It was when I was in the fleet. We would see them come through, and it's you got to reward people for ingenuity.
Yes, definitely. And towards the end of your book, you ask some pretty thought-provoking and hard questions. So what do you hope policymakers take away from this history?
That's a good point. I think that the biggest thing is that we need to do is really anticipate the long war, right? Just look at Russia and Ukraine today. Did anyone expect there still to be headlines today, of what's going on over there? World War One. I think when that's kicked off, everyone expected troops to be home by Christmas, right? 4 years later, we're still there. Protracted wars, we haven't seen a lot of them since World War II, and I have no idea how long Ukraine and Russia's going to go on. But I mean, we're a year and a half right now, so that's something that I hope that decision and policymakers are thinking about. How are we going to support troops in the ground, troops at sea, if a protracted shooting war happens? Now, there's all kind of different stuff going on now. Obviously, there's cyber, and there's precision guided weapons that we didn't have in the 1940s. So there's many other ways to fight. But were we to get into a conventional war, can we fix the broken airplanes that are at sea, right? How well trained or how capable are our air crew and our maintainers out there now of fixing an F-35 that's a fifth generation fighter, and who knows what else is in that software out there. What clearances do you need? How much are we relying on contractors to do that work versus how much are we teaching in the schools? And I've been out of the fleet for a good really 10 years, so I'm not an expert in what's being taught out there, but I know when I was down at Nav Air, you couldn't get close to an F-35 without special clearance to see inside that thing. They're just a fantastic airplane. But are we making, if they start getting shot out of the, if we start losing aircraft like we did in World War II, do we have the infrastructure and do the defense contractors have the ability to start cranking out planes? Will we ever get to the point where Grumman was delivering 500 in 1944? They were delivering 500 Hellcats a month. That's the F6F. to the Navy. 500 a month for almost a year. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to think and try and superimpose it on today. I mean, I think that's pretty much impossible because so much more technology. What I would say is that senior leaders, defense policymakers, I really would hope that they would look at and study this idea of skilled labor, right? Mm-hmm. I write in the book there, if there's no study of the personnel who labor to keep these weapons at the ready, right, or the schools and the commands that train them ashore, how can we understand the complete history of the greatest naval war in U.S. history, right? Mm-hmm. So if we don't understand what we did back then, are we going to be able to figure out what to do next time something like this happens? Right. So that is, I think, something that I would hope people take away from this history. It is just one part of the war. It's not the end all be all. And then really think about what happens when the next war, God forbid, lasts, instead of months, years. Our 21st century military is prepared, and Navy is particularly prepared to obtain, this skilled labor that's necessary to fight a multi-year protracted war over large distances. We don't do anything in one local areas. We're very globalized, right? So the Pacific's a big area, as we saw. So those are kind of my thoughts on what to do with when you study history, and hopefully people keep that in mind as we make new policy.
And where should people go when they finish with your book and they want to learn more?
Well, my publisher, U.S. Naval Institute Press, I think have a fantastic library of books that are out there that have just to give you a much bigger, broader understanding of the war. Right? There's really not a whole lot out there about particularly naval maintenance, naval aircraft maintenance. In fact, I don't know there's anything out there. I think that's, but just in general, if you can take this and then put this in the, kind of, if you have an understanding of what goes on and what it takes to get an airplane off of a carrier to go out and bomb Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Tokyo, and so forth, right? What does it take to get Billy Mitchell's the Doolittle planes off the carrier into Tokyo? Then they can understand the complete story a little bit better.
Yeah.
So Naval Institute Press, they've got a great library. NHHC, Naval History and Heritage Center, they've got a wealth of knowledge over there, and on their website, I mean, it's basically interactive library museum that you can really get a good taste of all this information. And there's a lot of stuff that's written up on it. Pensacola Naval Museum, they've got a good amount of stuff in it, and the Navy and the Navy Yard is actually, we're in the process of building a new museum of the United States Navy in DC, right there by the Navy Yard. So when that comes online, I do hope that it will have some of this in there as far as the maintenance, the enlisted side of naval aviation, and I think it will. I know the director who's running that. He's Chris Renfro is a great guy that I used to work with, and actually was in my positions before. So he's a former naval aviator as well. So he understands the value of these guys.
Awesome. And where can people find you if they have questions and want to talk to you more and have you come and talk about your book or any of your other scholarship?
Well, you can find me on the Naval Academy's website, particularly in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, as well as the History Department's website. I am in the process of producing my own.
Hey there, listener. Brief interruption. Our Zoom connection dropped a bit, so the website you want to look for is sustainingthecarrierwar.com. I have included the link in the show notes in the episode. Okay, back to Dr. Fisher.
And I am very willing to talk and provide my opinions on all this stuff, because it's all my opinions, and none of this is the official Department of Navy or Naval Academy information. This is all Stan Fisher's research, Stan Fisher's own personal project based on my own research. So hit me up. I'm more than willing to talk about it. Love this stuff.
Awesome. And and lastly, as we wrap up, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like future readers to know?
I think lastly, I would just say that this study and this book, it really underscores the importance of education in the process of creating a modern and effective military. I focus on Navy, but you could take a lot of this stuff and superimpose it on the Army or the Air Force, and obviously the Marines go hand in hand with the Navy. But education, technical, vocational education, I think we've moved away from it in our society, and we're all about we're about STEM. You know, I'm not. I'm a liberal arts guy. English undergrad with history graduate degree, but I understand that the concept of STEM. But we really need to not lose our grip on what it means. Teaching people how to turn a wrench, teaching people how to actually get their hands dirty and do the work, because as much as we focus on technology and getting better and more in AI and all this stuff, you're still going to need to tighten bolts and wrenches and fix problems. And so vocational education, technical education, that is an extremely big part of our Navy and military in general. So hopefully that does not escape the big vision.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Fisher, for coming on and sharing about your scholarship. And for all my listeners out there, if you have any interest in military history or United States history, I'd highly, highly recommend picking up a copy of Sustaining the Carrier War. It is a thorough and fascinating look into the importance of manpower in preparing for and sustaining military operations. Thank you, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And there you have it, friends. As someone who considers herself undereducated in the field of military history, I cannot recommend Dr. Fisher's book enough. He places you in the middle of the action, so to speak, and guides his readers through the massive maze that is the United States military. Be sure to pick up a copy wherever you get your books, but I went ahead and included the publisher's information in the show notes for the episode if you'd rather just buy from the source. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Civics and Coffee. If you want to hear more small snippets from American history, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.